Ladies and gents, I'm Suji Reacts and this is History Summarized Ancient India by the channel All This Akashi Production. In the first of what is sure to be multi-part series, let's take a look at the history of ancient India from the early civilization through the development of Sanskrit literature and all the way to the great Maurya Empire. Multi-part series, oh yeah, there's also classical India, I guess. So yeah, look, yes, I'm an Indian, but that does not mean I'm an Indian historian or something. So don't expect that I'll know everything about this thing, even though I'm pretty sure I will have something to say about it. The Mahabharata video was just 1 minute long and my reaction was about 12 minutes, so I guess we'll see. Remember people, if you like my reaction, don't forget to like and subscribe. Check out the reaction, this link in the description. Check out the cast of the playlist like All This Akashi Production Reaction. I upload lots of videos in 24 hours. Usually 2 from this channel. One is history, one is mythological. So if you haven't seen them, check out the cast. It's all in there, I guess. Check out the playlist too, like Cuz Gazat in a Nutshell, Tierzu, CGP Grey, History. Yeah, let's do this one.
Ancient Indian history feels like the halfway point between a fairy tale and a Lovecraft story. On the one hand, you have fables of princes going out into the wild to seek enlightenment and guilt-ridden emperors swearing off of conquest to become legendary peacemakers, but there are also entire cosmologies simply spoken into existence and a Bronze Age civilization about a millennium ahead of the rest of the world that just fades into nothingness. And the rest of Indian history is like this too. It's so large and diverse, but almost like a jigsaw puzzle, every piece still fits together into one cohesive whole. And we can see the outlines of this big picture of India back in the earliest sparks of civilization. So, to wind back the clock and see where India got its start, let's do some history. This video is brought to you by Audible. More on that later. Our earliest evidence of Indian civilization is a string of settlements along the Indus River Valley in the 2 and 3000s BC. And as far as Bronze Age civilizations go, the Indus Valley is by far the raddest. The floodplain was easy to cultivate and build on, so the society that sprung up was startlingly well urbanized. In the cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, excavated by the British in the 18 and 1900s, we found standardized building bricks, streets laid out on a grid system to catch the breeze and cool down the city, with built-in sewage systems and massive public baths. Centuries before the pyramids of Giza, India had urban planning that wouldn't be beat until the Greeks and Romans some 2,000 years later. And the construction quality seems to show that the people of the Indus Valley had been refining this system for a while. As the rest of the Bronze Age civilizations were blowing money on temples and palaces, the Indus Valley had long since made great public works and figured out zoning laws. And they weren't an insular civilization either. Their trade networks—
Even I didn't know that. Then again, I didn't pay much attention to history when I was a kid. Yeah, I mean, public baths and everything, that is surprising because I thought that was only Greek and Roman thing, huh? So even years before, centuries before, I guess, Mohenjo-Daro used to do that.
With Mesopotamia were so speedy that they could import fish from the Arabian Sea. Plus, Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa aren't exactly neighbors, so the parallels between them imply a kind of overarching government. But we're clueless as to what, partially because we can't decipher their writing. And the craziest part is that we've hardly found any weapons anywhere. As far as we can tell, they were totally peaceful. But that's the Bronze Age for you. Everything feels convenient.
I highly doubt that. Even when the, caveman time, we were not peaceful. So just because we didn't find any swords or weapons doesn't mean they were peaceful. Even though that would be surprising, isn't it? What if they were peaceful? Long centuries and centuries, they just lived there like violence. What's violence? Why would we hurt each other and just being wise and something like that? That would be so weird. Like, okay.
Confusing, atemporal, and kind of Lovecraftian, and it all goes poof just as weirdly as it first appears.
How is it Lovecraftian? I don't know Lovecraft lore, but isn't that all about just, sea monsters or whatever?
So at some point between the 17 and 1500s, the Indus Valley civilization slowly disappeared for reasons that we can really only guess at. The two most likely options are that the soil eventually lost its nutrients and stopped yielding crops after a millennium or so, or that an earthquake altered the course of the river and dried up several tributaries. Whatever the case, it seems that the people—
Or maybe everybody suddenly realized, oh wait a minute, we can hurt each other and there is such thing as violence. Everybody just killed each other.
Of the Indus Valley ventured further into the peninsula and eventually settled in the far south. So the valley's ruins lay hidden until British grave robbers rolled up in the 1800s and used the stones as ballast for a railway.
Good heavens, these natives aren't colonized. We'll be fixing that.
project. Stay classy, Britain. But our story continues in the centuries after the Indus Valley Civilization with the slow migration of the Indo-Aryans from Central Asia. Quick aside, that label's become kinda controversial in the past century for reasons that are wholly unrelated to Indian history, so I'll be using that term for its intended historical meaning. Instead of prolific builders, the Aryans—
What do you mean? Aryan? It's not Aryan, it's Aryan. Aryan just means, I think in Sanskrit, it just means nobleman or something like that. I don't know why Hitler and everybody just took that as a superior race or whatever. I don't know where that come from.
Were storytellers, and they're often known as the Vedic peoples after their holy scriptures called the Vedas. These were a series of stories including everything from big cosmology down to aspects of their own daily life. And
Rigveda. This is Ru, not Re. So I don't know why there's I there. I don't know, whenever Sanskrit, Hindi or any, words get translated into the English, I guess, letters change somehow. It's not Rigveda, Rigveda. Yajurveda. Then, it's Yajurved, Samved, not Veda, it's Ved. Atharvaved, okay.
they were all retold as hymns being memorized and perfected to the very syllables. These divine hymns form much of the basis of Hinduism both as a religion and more broadly as a foundation of ancient Indian culture. Historically, Hinduism is quite unique because of its continuity from ancient origins to widespread modern practice. That's cool, but also extremely nuanced and complex, so I'm gonna move right along to the next core aspect of Indo-Aryan culture, the caste system.
Yeah, complex. It's good that he just moved on from that, because then I would have to give reaction commentary on that, and even I would have been lost there.
Great! When the Aryans came across the native Adivasi people, they maintained political stability via a strict social hierarchy, with the Aryans at the top and everybody else below them. A story we've seen many times on this channel. But as the Aryans and the Adivasi mixed over the centuries, the system later stratified by profession rather than by ethnic group. At the top were the Brahmin priests, then the Kshatriya lords and warriors, the Vaisya merchants and farmers, the Shudra laborers, and the subcaste untouchables who were fully ostracized by society. The big yikes here is that a social hierarchy based on class rather than race is malleable to whomever is in charge. So the caste system—
how splendid. They're already familiar with the standard protocol. That is something, isn't it? Why is, this, caste system type of thing is, I guess, universal. With every civilization, there is always that these people are better than these people, and there are levels of people, I guess. And these people are just bad, I guess, worse. There's always that kind of leveling system somehow. In all cultures, there's always been like, these people are better than these people. I don't know why.
Has survived the rise and fall of empires to systematically oppress the Indian people for basically 3,000 years. So just keep that in the back of your minds for the entirety of Indian history, and let's swiftly move along. As the Vedic tradition grew and evolved in the first millennium BC, a new wave of philosophical thinking cropped up via a series of texts called the Upanishads. Its name comes from the Sanskrit for sitting down.
Look, here's the thing. Whenever Hindi or Sanskrit or any word gets translated into English, I don't know why there are A's. I guess, there is A is also A is also A. That's why they put it there. But it's not Upanishad, it's Upanishad. Alright, there is, there's no pa in it. If there has to be one line here additional, if it was Upanishad. I know this is nitpicking, but yeah.
Near, as a student would sit by their mentor while receiving divine knowledge through a discussion of philosophy. Similar to the Analects of Confucius or the Tao Te Ching, the Upanishads are presented as a series of brief teachings. The early ones appear along the four Vedas, but many Upanishads were composed and added later. So whereas the Vedas form the basis of Indian religion and mythology, the Upanishads are the core of Indian philosophy. It's here that we get the first mentions of topics from the cycle of reincarnation to our duties as people.
Yeah, I think, Upanishad, if I remember correctly, is part of Vedas. I think Vedas are the, main category. In that subcategory are Upanishad or something like that. There are certain Vedas, and inside there are countless Upanishads or something like that. If I'm remembering correctly, that's the case here.
And the consequences of our actions, as well as our sense of self within the greater totality of the universe. It's a lot of terms, I know, but the Upanishads are as broad as they are dense, and there is a lot to unpack there. The big mind melt at the end is that our localized self, Atman, is really made up of the same stuff as the big cosmic everything of Brahman, and when we realize that we're all the same, our Atman returns to Brahman like a drop of water returning
Atman just means soul. Your soul is Atman. Birth and death, that's a cycle, reincarnation cycle, which is called samsara, which is here. And when you go out from your cycle and mix in with the Brahman, which is this supreme God, and is also the part of universe or something like that. Every mythology has this, where there are the main God, who's also the world too. I think that's also is in the Greek mythology. Like, I guess Uranus is the sky or something like that. From there, Titans came. From there, the Olympians came, something like that. So Brahman is the supreme God, who's also the universe, that kind of thing. So, and I don't, this is a mistake. Samsara just means the, cycle of, reincarnation. When you go out of them, it's called moksha. So, when you mix in with the, Brahman and just, go out of the reincarnation cycle, it's called moksha, not samsara.
To an ocean. Aside from the big metaphysics, there's so much to learn from the Upanishads, and philosophers from across time have lavished praise for both their sincerity of tone and their...
It is the most satisfying and elevating reading which is possible in the world. It has been solace of my life and will be the solace of my death. Only reason he said that because it's so big. I think by the end of it, he's like, this has to be better. Because I've spent so much time reading into it. Seriously, Mahabharata is vast. From there are books that is even bigger. From there, Vedas, Upanishads, there's so much text. I would never read all that. That's how big that is.
Their depth of wisdom. So let's see, theology, philosophy. Aha! We've also got to talk about the epics, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. Much like the...
For the love of...
Aha! We've also got to talk about the epics, the Ramayana...
Is Ramayana, not Ramayana. There's an A issue there. I always found it when I was growing up, learning English. Like, why am I putting A? Because it could be both Ramayana, Ramayan. It's Ramayan. There is, in Sanskrit, you always end in the end. Ramayanam, Mahabharatam. So this is Mahabharata, not Mahabharata.
And the Mahabharata. Much like the Iliad and the Odyssey, these two big Indian epics blend fact and myth in a way that isn't historical, but is indicative of the world as the ancients envisioned it. It's a neat switch of perspectives. The truth here isn't in facts and dates of the wars being recorded, but rather the divine elements of the stories help frame the human philosophical truths at the core of both of these epics. Now, that said, if some long books are doorstops, then the Mahabharata is the entire door.
Look at the difference. Iliad 15,000 lines, or is it 12,000 lines? Mahabharata 200,000 lines. Damn. Look, when I was a kid, since then I've been seeing the shows and everything. Mahabharata is kind of big thing here. It also blends into, what does this teach us, morals and everything. So it's a big thing, Ramayana and Mahabharata both. So, Ramayana is kind of understandable. It's short enough that it's understandable. Mahabharata is so big. And there's so many stories that branch out from that. Since I was a kid, I used to hear all these stories, watch shows and everything. And yet, like I said, I reacted to 12-minute video of just 1 minute original video. So the thing is, it's so big that even I don't think I know even half of it. And I don't think I'm ever going to read that. That's how big that is. So if Red is actually working on right now of making big Mahabharata video, I think she's going to abandon it just because how big it is.
It's the story of a great succession crisis and a subsequent war sometime around the 14th century BC, and it is just loaded with deities front to back. But the most famous section of the story, the Bhagavad Gita, narrows in on the internal struggle of the hero Arjuna to do his duty even when it's difficult. None of us will fight alongside literal gods in a giant succession crisis. I mean, well, probably. But all of us will struggle to do the right thing. Likely a lot of times. I, for instance...
Yeah, Lord Krishna is, like I said in the Krishna video, is literal avatar of the main god Vishnu. Vishnu is one of the three main gods, So Lord Krishna is really powerful is an understatement. So at this point, he's just there as a, I guess, moral support and thing like that. He's not actually contributing, if I'm remembering correctly, that much. Because if we were to contribute, the war would be all like that because he's way too powerful. That's the implication here. So he's just the one who's riding the chariot. Arjuna is the one who's doing all the damage.
All of us will struggle to do the right thing, likely a lot of times. I, for instance, know that it's irresponsible to monopolize this channel for Roman history memes, but that doesn't mean that I'm not tempted. I'm getting off topic. The Ramayana and the Mahabharata are clearly some of humanity's most influential literature. Between the epics, the Upanishads, and the Vedas, it's evident just how much of Indian culture derives from these core texts. I'll be fully honest, when I started researching this, I really did think that I was making a history video, but now here I am realizing I've just made a giant book report. Ah well, you take the sources you can get. And unfortunately, what we have in an overflowing font of ancient literature, we lack in most other forms of historical documentation for a good several centuries. But the picture gets a lot clearer once we hit the 600s through 300s BC, as we have archaeological and written evidence for a loose collection of independent states and kingdoms across northeast India. Researchers have found large cities and dense fortifications, as well as new forms of poetry and metallurgy, and the development of Brahmi writing. Among these 16 Mahajanapadas, as they're snappily known, and as I'm sure I've horribly mispronounced, there seems to have been some intense competition as well as interstate trade. Still not a whole lot to go on, but if it's anything like the other clusters of small independent states that we've seen in history, whether it's the Greeks and the Italians or the Maya and the Chinese warring states, it was probably pretty cool. What we do have from this political climate is a famous story of one Indian prince named Siddhartha Gautama. For his entire life,
Siddhartha Gautam, I think that's the name. He's gonna become Buddha.
This prince was kept secluded in a palace by his parents, knowing nothing but luxury, health, and joy. But one day he asked to leave his palace and go see the outside world, and was horrified to see people who were sick, gross, and worse, dying. So he flipped out over the sudden and devastating realization of humanity's suffering and of his own impending mortality, and he camped out in the middle of the woods for a month, refusing to leave until he either died or figured out a way to end all human suffering.
Well, he just made sound him like, he's some queasy weakling or something. No, that wasn't the case, if I remember correctly. The case was, or at least that's what we've been taught, that, he was a king. He was living lavish life because he was a king, prince, king, whatever. And then he saw that how poor are suffering outside in his, in his empire or whatever. And he saw how everywhere people are living poorly, barely eating, they can't even eat sometimes, and how everybody's suffering while he's wearing all this gold jewelry and all these clothes. So at that point, he came to realization like, okay, this is not right. So he just gave up. Basically, he's the first monk, I guess. So he gave up all those things and become more monk-like, just simple life in that sense, became more wise or something like that over time. So that's what happened, I think.
Luckily for him, he actually got the desired outcome and achieved the enlightened state of nirvana. Prince Siddhartha, now called Buddha, realized that the ideal life was the middle path between extravagance and asceticism, where all outward suffering could be conquered solely through a complete mastery of the self. And just like that, bada bing, bada eightfold path, we've got a shiny new religion. But before we wrap this story up, we've got to talk about some wars. After Alexander the Far From Home failed to push past the Indus River and decided to call it quits and go home, an exiled Kshatriya named Chandragupta took advantage of the kerfuffle and conquered across northern India to found the Maurya Empire, India's first large, properly centralized state. The new empire established diplomatic ties with Hellenistic Greece as well as China, and built up considerable infrastructure within the empire itself. Chandragupta was by all accounts a solid ruler, keeping a hands-off approach for his 2 decades in power and letting his people be.
For the Jain ideal of dying by willful starvation in the woods. Wait a minute, he was native to my state, right? Yeah, that makes sense. Jain, yeah.
He died fasting in the woods, his son was pretty meh, and there was an interregnum afterwards, but then his grandson Ashoka was one of the coolest cats in history.
Oh, that's what he meant at the start of the video, who became badass, then became more Buddhist and spread the peaceful message around the country.
73 BC, he conquered eastward to the coast of Kalinga, and the result was an absolute bloodbath with hundreds of thousands dead on both sides. When he heard the news, he felt really bad about it, so he issued a full apology throughout his empire and abandoned warfare entirely to become a Buddhist. He then worked to build...
Yeah, I don't think, it was like, obviously this is just, more like, funny side of the story, but if I remember correctly, the story goes as that it was so bloody, like more than your usual siege and battle type of bloody, and lots of people die left and right, just way horrible. I mean, Ashoka, just, if I'm not, just means that, I don't know what it, I don't remember the words, but it just means somebody who's just, strong and stable or something like that. So he's not the one person you think that see bloodshed and go like, oh, that's too much blood, but he still did, which means there was so much bloodshed at that battle, at that war, that he's like, oh, screw this, then became peaceful, became Buddhist and everything. So that just make me think how bloody that war was, how many people died needlessly. Damn.
Trade relations and improved the lives of his people, he was super tolerant of other faiths, and he wrote extensively about his own journey to inner peace through Buddhism. That has got to be the single biggest heel-face turn in history. His life seems almost surreal, but there it is, a conqueror who felt remorse and changed his ways. Unfortunately, his successors were far less able than him, and soon pockets of the empire slipped away before the assassination of Emperor Brihadratha extinguished the Maurya Empire for good in 180 BC. And that's ancient India, from the Indus River Valley to Ashoka the Great. What I find most amazing is the massive catalog of literature that took shape at such an early stage. It's an incredibly strong foundation that's at once diverse and cohesive, and so exquisitely preserved after nearly 3,000 years. And speaking of 3,000 years, the next chapter of Indian history is going to have to be a story for another video, because if I seriously tried to summarize that all at once, I may actually burst. We here at OSP love a good story, and if you want to listen to them at home or
yeah, okay. So, after, how Mohenjo-daro and after everything, how they went to all the way south and became the Dravidian Empire. And they, they founded I think the language Tamil that is still used today in the South India, which is older than Sanskrit. I think one of the, if not the oldest language, if I'm remembering correctly, I don't know, 5,000-6,000 years old or something like that. I don't know. Tamil language is really old. And Sanskrit language came right after that, so it's also close. But I think Tamil is the oldest language, which is still being used. If you go to South India, that's the language everybody's speaking of. There's also entire, like Bollywood, there's also an entire, movie industry with that language, I guess. So I mean, ancient India, I mean, there's history so long with Mahabharata, Ramayana. It's so much, detail and history. Even I'm not going to read through all that, even if I want to, and want to go in depth. Like as a profession, even if I want to, I want to become historian of India and whatever, I would still not do it. That's so deep. Alright people, if you like my reaction to food, like, subscribe, check out the reaction, there's a link in the description, check out the cards, please check out the end cards, and I'll see you next time.